Jason, I'm wondering whether or not you want to do at least a brief definition of bioregionalism, regeneration movement, this kind of stuff.
Well, I think
Yeah,
of it in two different ways. One is purely just in terms of political boundaries. And it's the idea that political boundaries should align with uh, eco-cultural boundaries, right? And so many of the boundaries that we see, especially in formerly colonized countries, are very artificial and quite violent in terms of how they split apart different ethnicities and put together other ethnicities. And so it didn't make any kind of cultural sense except from the point of view of the colonizer. So we still have a legacy of that. And then we also have the ecological boundaries. There was this, we had a previous podcast with Andrew Millison, and he was talking about how Powell, I forget his full name, but he was advocating in like the 1800s watershed democracy for the
Mm.
United States, where states and even counties would be delineated based on watersheds and subwatersheds, and just how much more sense that would make in terms of land management and kind of navigating the various jurisdictions around land management. And also, he was talking about how he's been doing a lot of documentary work in India of like whole Indian villages adopting these kind of permacultural principles and seeing these like drastic results. And we were commenting that that's only possible because the whole village can get on board, and that whole village happens to align with the watershed boundaries, right? And that's
Mm.
just kind of the historical legacy that connection never got cut, and it makes ecological and social regeneration much more viable. And so, the second aspect of bioregionalism is just you know, designing society and cultures around landscapes, right? So
Mhm.
there's a political boundaries issue, but then there's just the more the ethos that a lot of bioregionalists in the 60s and 70s, talked about of how do we align human cultures around landscapes, and that's how most human cultures, have existed, for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Most indigenous cultures, aligned around landscapes. They didn't have the fossil fuels and technology to cover, to destroy, to remove a mountaintop if you want the coal, for example. So, so it's asking the question, you know, given where we are today, how do we move back in that direction, with the baggage and or opportunity of modernity, with us and behind us, and
Yep.
modern technology, and the fact that you can't always go backwards, you have to move forward. So how do we start connecting ecological corridors again for various endangered species? How do you restore watersheds and align human settlements with watershed management? How do we start living more ecologically?
Yep.
What it really comes down to. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of a form of localism as well, of being connected to your landscape, but it's a little bit broader idea than the concept of the village. Um,
Yep. And I would just add briefly that the other thing that's a theme in the regeneration movement is looking to past civilizations who had ecological practices, like humans as steward roles, that could be recreated in the modern era with modern tools. So, like, for example, a big tool for regeneration is this thing called rotational grazing, which is kind of mimicking how Native Americans managed bison in the Great Plains. So like looking to this ecological heritage and kind of trying to bring those principles forth. And now the way farmers do it is just through electric fencing, and they kind of bunch their cattle together, and they do the similar kind of process that Native Americans did with planned burns and some management of the bison populations that built like this crazy rich topsoil and in the whole center of the United States. And so anyway, so I think that's some important context.
yeah, and I would just add one little tidbit is just looking at it like bioregionalism from an economic perspective. Instead of building the economy kind of to address a kind of abstract market using price signals, you instead you know, build the economy from bottom up, from the landscape up, and use signals about the health of the ecosystem
Mm,
as guidance.
mm. And I would just say, like, I guess one thing that's like the elephant in the room here is that all of these things we're talking about are alternatives to the mainstream industrial, both market and state, in sort of propping up the market. And all the kinds of strategies we're talking about are just sort of trying to be crafty ways to like combat that. It's hugely powerful. The state is hugely subsidizing industrial, processes, manufacturing, agriculture. So it is like it does, all of this that we're talking about does feel like an uphill battle because you're really just trying to be crafty against this giant behemoth that has huge amounts of momentum and energy and power, both literally energy and like human capital power, political power. So anyway, just a little elephant in the room is that this is in contrast to that mainstream system, basically.
Yeah, Ashley, I so resonate with that because just my experience at Shareable, yeah, it was learning journey, and I came into it thinking like a parallel economy could be developed, and that faded pretty quickly, um, and the realization that you have to engage in politics to make room for the alternative for it to survive, and to combat the dominant system as well as like remove those subsidies so there's kind of like a level playing field. At the same time, I differed from some of my peers in that I saw the possibility of a kind of heterodox economy where these different forms could coexist and be complementary, and also where the state, the market, and the commons could interact in a synergistic way, a complementary way. And I wasn't of the opinion that we would move from one monolithic model to another. I don't think
Right.
that's a good idea.
Right.